Welcome everybody to this session on titled ChatCEO, how AI is influencing leadership and labor. I think undoubtedly the question of how AI affects organizations and workers is on everybody's mind and will affect individual workers, leaders in the organizations, but also policymakers. You know, the question is basically like, how does it affect work and what is left for humans to be done? We have a fantastic panel together of experts exploring the topic of how AI impacts organization and labor in general. Let me introduce the moderator first and then the panelists and then pass it on to Dean Jelani Cobb. So Jelani Cobb is the Dean of Columbia's Journalism School since 2022. He's also a staff writer at The New Yorker since 2015 and an award-winning journalist and political analyst for MSNBC. He's a Peabody Award winner and Pulitzer Prize finalist, and he has authored and edited multiple books on race, politics, and culture, and has produced documentaries including Whose Vote Counts and Policing the Police. He's educated at Howard and Rutgers has received numerous honors, including election of the American Academic of Arts and Science and honorary doctorates at Cooper Union and Rutgers University. And then we have an amazing group of panelists here. Let me start with the first one next to Dean Cobb. This is Tim Wu. He's the Julius Silver Professor of Law, Science, and Technology and the leading experts on competition policy, antitrust, and private power, known for coining the term net neutrality. And he served as a special assistant to President Biden for technology and competition policy. He's a former enforcement counselor, White House advisor, and antitrust enforcer, and has written influential books on corporate concentration and media influence, contributing to major publications and has been recognized among Americans' most influential legal and policy figures. Next to Tim is Lydia Chilton. She's an assistant professor in Columbia's Engineering Computer Science Department, and she leads the Computational Design Lab, which develops AI tool to enhance productivity. Her research is focused on crowdsourcing, designing better solutions through iteration, and improving communication with visual and textual clarity. Next to her is Andrea Prat. He is the Richard Paul Richmond Professor of Business at Columbia Business School and also the Professor of Economics at Columbia University, and he specializes in organizational economics and political economy. His research focuses on incentive provision, corporate leadership, employee motivation, organizational language, and media influence on democracy. He's also a fellow of the British Academy and the Econometric Society. Next to him is nobody right now, but Suresh Naidu will join, hopefully shortly. He is the Professor of International and Public Affairs at the Chagwan and Eco Rand Professor of Economics at Columbia University and teaches economics, political economy and development. And his research is focused on economic effects of political transition, international migration, and an economic application of natural language processes. So an amazing moderator and a great panel. So I pass it on to you, Dean Cobb, to take us onto a journey on how AI affects organizations and labor.
Okay, thank you. So I'm happy to be here with you. I'm really happy to be able to engage in this conversation with these very insightful panelists. I will tell you that some months ago, there was a dinner at which I attended and 10 other deans were in attendance. And we went around the table to just talk about the things that we were working on in our various schools. And of the 11 of us, 10 mentioned the letters A and I across a wide array of fields of inquiry. And as we have law, engineering, business, journalism represented here today, gives us a window into just how widely applicable these technologies are. And so one other point is that when you, earlier your comments framed the question of what is there left for us to do, I had a kind of brief existential dread that just passed over me. It was like, we're here to ponder our mortal redundancy as it relates to technology. But more directly, I'd like to start out with a question about the relationship between opportunity and disruption. And I think that every conversation about AI in some way or another can be evaluated by the ratio of how much people talk about opportunity, how much people talk about disruption or even possible danger. And I wonder if we could just kind of get a quick tally, starting with Tim and working our way down, about how you feel opportunity and disruption relate to each other at this technology, at this juncture.
I think that's a good way of putting it and a good way of answering the question. Thanks for having me here. I'm glad to see everybody, and it's great to be at this it's a chance to get to meet some other Columbia people who I have seen now and then, but we don't see each other too much. So it's a good question. I in my research have spent a lot of time studying the effects of new technologies on inequality and economic development. And without answering the question directly, I want to say that things do go in different ways. There isn't any one answer as to whether, when people invent something, whether it whether it creates opportunity or whether it creates disruption. Usually, a little bit of both. I am strongly of the belief that it depends strongly on the distribution of economic power inside society, and is closely related to that. I think I'll give two technologies that I think historically have gone very different directions that show you how things could be for AI. One is the plow, big invention, agricultural plow. When you think about it, had an enormously liberating effect and created a lot of opportunities for farmers in many areas, and reinforced a business model that was more about decentralized economic power, a lot of small plots of land, being able to make money that way. The other invention that I'll mention is the cotton gin, which came to the American South in the 19th century at a time where economic power was very unfairly distributed, very obviously, plantation slavery. And that, also was an invention, but took an existing economic structure and made it worse. Mm-hmm. So I think that, I just want to start with the idea that I don't think technologies are automatically one or another. It really depends, to me, a lot the economic structure they're coming into. One thing I'm concerned about right now is we live in a time of great inequality. We live in a time where there's a lot of concentrated private power, particularly in the tech platforms when it comes to this. And I think labor power right now is weak. And that makes me concerned that power imbalance will lead to deployments of AI that are primarily designed to reduce costs for capital management as opposed to provide opportunities for smaller enterprises. So that's my framework.
I guess I do agree with most of that. Mm-hmm. I would also say that disruption just sort of is, and we get to live with it, whether you treat it as an opportunity or not, and whether it turns into an opportunity or not. It's a lot of complex factors, but it is going to happen. Even evolution by itself disrupts things. It doesn't necessarily require a human or a technology or anything like that. You can have social disruptions that have nothing to do with technology, and so we should and humans tend to not love having to adjust. We love when we just get to stay the course, unless you're, of course, the one disrupting, which is why tech likes tech disruptions. We don't like other kinds of disruptions. And so I kind of just see it as a fact of the universe rather than as a net positive or net negative, and you try to roll with it, and you try to be the one creating it rather than the one having to live with it. That's my advice.
So I just want to, I'll repeat the question for our guest, our tardy guest, who I'm giving a hard time because he's not only my colleague, but also my downstairs neighbor. So I'm going to see him in the lobby and give him a hard time again about this. But the question we have is about the ratio of opportunity to disruption and how we think of AI. I
agree with the fact that it's very difficult to tell what the ratio is going to be right now. Yeah. But I think one thing that's important, and I think where universities can do a lot, is in, so a lot of the stuff that comes in from AI is very black boxy. We don't know what's inside, we don't know how it works, especially when it comes to business applications. So I think a big role we have as universities and as business schools is to try to open up that stuff and try to, first of all, get as much transparency as we can, and also try to create open versions of that so that we can evaluate what it is that it does, especially when we talk about firms and workers. If we understand exactly what it does, then we're in a better position of judging what the likely effects are going to be, and we're in a better position of having policy around it.
Sorry for being late. I was teaching my PhD students and got very excited about teaching about the effects of MBAs on wages and turnover. I'll save that.
Which, who among us is not guilty of the same?
Okay, I'm just gonna, for entertainment's sake, take like the extreme position, which like I actually just kind of see, for net society as a whole, opportunities kind of zero. We're gonna get a lot of disruption. There's gonna be like some people that do great. There's gonna be other people that lose, but the net kind of like overall improvements for social mobility, I think just like go down a lot. Here's why. It's basically because, you know, if you had to think of the one thing that we did in the 19th century that really raised social mobility, it was like mass education in a way that like really sort of took out the influence of parents, took out the influence of a lot of things, and made it that labor brought something to the table that you couldn't replace with a machine. Now, I would like to think that I still think there is going to be plenty of these things that we have, but overwhelmingly, when you look at the scarce inputs into AI, it's all capital. It's energy, it's chips, it's like, and it's basically the things that basically having a lot of wealth is kind of the asset whose productivity has been drastically amplified. And wealth is bequestable. And so the people that inherit a lot are going to do very well. And I think the people that don't inherit anything are going to do even worse. So that's my...
So I want to follow up with this a little bit and add another term into the mix, which is limitation. And so for conversations with people who are optimistic about these technologies, and you know, admittedly, there's a kind of stunningly wide array of applications. I mentioned that just at the outset here. But for people who are optimistic, it almost sounds like you're listening to someone who has newly fallen in love. They're great, and they're tall, and they're funny, and they can do this, and all of these wonderful things. And you know, in instance after instance, whenever we see widely disruptive technologies or you know, even other kinds of disruptions, we only see the broad vista of possibility, and only later do we learn the limitations. If we were to follow the falling in love analogy, it would be like following up with that person 6 months later when they're like, they snore like a chainsaw, and whatever other things that are limitations of this person. I wonder if we could think about, and I'll just give one example here, you know, we're already seeing the disruption in journalism amid all the other disruptions, but there are things that AI will never be able to do that you still need a journalist to be able to go handle. We already see those kinds of things. I wonder if there are things that are apparent or maybe just beyond the horizon that you think about that are inherently limiting in terms of what we might be able to do.
Well, I'll take a start on that. One thing that happens with the early part of every technology is that people tend to extrapolate from its current rate of progress and assume it'll keep going, you know, and on a linear basis. So if you know, you go back to the 1960s, they sort of presumed, well, we got airplanes now, jet engines, soon we'll have like space rockets, and you know, soon we'll be going from here to Rome in 15 minutes or something like that. And in fact, you know, airplanes have gotten slower over the last 40 years for mass transit, and things plateaued. And Similarly with artificial intelligence, there is a tendency to extrapolate from what we have now and assume that it will be good at many things that it isn't right now. And it could be, but there's going to be some inflection point. Whether we've starting to reach it with LLMs, large language models, I think is one. I mean, I use LLMs a lot. I'm sure many of our panelists also do. And there's this effect, I kind of call it the microwave oven effect. I was, unlike my students, alive during the 80s. And I remember when the microwave oven came out, and it was a wonder. And I was talking about it, and our neighbor bought one on the premise that it was going to save a lot of electricity over normal ovens. And it was going to replace, and people are talking about the microwave oven as kind of replacing the stovetop, replacing all this kind of stuff. And our neighbor had a Thanksgiving dinner, and they decided to put their turkey and roast their turkey in the microwave. I remember that.
We know how this story
ends.
Anyway,
that didn't go too well. But the point of it is there's these moments, and one of those moments where a technology seems possibly great for everything. It may turn out that it's really great for a select number of things. Like already I'm finding with LLMs, they're very good for summarizing large amounts of information. But if you've ever asked it to write an op-ed for you or something, it comes out like a bad student paper or something like that, or just very kind of ritualistic or things like that. So I think we are in the process of finding the limits. I would say, now to just directly answer your question in this sort of microwave oven effect, I think somehow summarization seems to be to me, but original insight, I've never had an LLM, at least, the ones I've experimented with, give me that sort of original material. That's just my thinking. But summarization, very strong and hard to imagine wanting to use a human for that if you can get away with the AI.
I don't know if we...
Yeah?
Great.
Excellent. Yes, our first fight. Let's go. Round one. I actually think that summarization is one of the things that it's worst at, because I don't trust its summaries. And it usually abstracts out the details that I need the most. So people talked about AI. I'm like, what did they say that was interesting? And so that hasn't been particularly helpful for me. Defining what a summary is and why it's useful is actually quite hard. It's not just making something shorter and saying things that aren't false. I would have agreed with you a lot in January. January 15th, I would have agreed with you. But then my best friend DeepSeek came out and other reasoning technologies, and they have totally changed my and a lot of other people's behavior. I didn't really used to use AI for work, despite being an AI positivist and teaching in all my classes, and I was like, ooh, I'm not really using this. But DeepSeek I do, and DeepSeek I just put all my documents in there. I'm like, find some connections between these things that I can, here's a grant. They want something about fantasy sports. Guess how much I know about fantasy sports. Now that said, I was putting AI in the position of being an expert, but I also gave it all my stuff. I'm like, which of these grants has anything to say? And it actually found something that I could write about.
All right.
So with the DeepSeek model, so part of it is just being able to take in enough of my context that it can leverage, so my papers, my writing, so it can build on top of what I know, so I don't have to type in everything I already know or just be satisfied with whatever's in Wikipedia, which is sort of how I model what's in GPT and stuff like that. And especially if you're asking it to do something a little outside of your domain where you're not an expert in. I agree with op-eds, because you're probably an expert in that. I've read a couple of yours. That it's not going to be as good as you, but it depends on what you're asking it to do. So one of the things I really see as powerful about generative AI technologies is a lot of business has been incredibly siloed. The engineers are over here and the designers over here, and they speak even the business school is over there. We don't talk, we don't have same languages. Things get reinvented, deep learning was reinvented in statistics and physics and computer science, and there's a whole other war about that. But I can type in my papers and say, what would a psychologist say about this? Give me some theories that are relevant. What would be a business approach to this? And it doesn't have to be the right answer, but it can get me starting to cross that chasm. So those have been the places where I have found insights. Maybe not the end of it, but at least the start where I can see across fields.
Have you seen limits or not? Because I find when I try to write stuff, it does feel to me like microwave turkey. Like the stuff, you know what I mean? Like it's edible. I can use it. Sometimes I can learn from it, but I wouldn't serve it.
Okay, so my in-laws are from Eastern Europe, and they do not have a microwave, and it is the worst, okay? So don't microwave a turkey, like you're doing it wrong. Microwaves. Let me tell you, when you have kids who want to eat this and this and this, and you gotta reheat like 8 different things to get them to eat one vegetable, a microwave is really handy. Waiting for it to heat up on the stove, not so much. And wow, this analogy is going pretty well, so I'm gonna continue it. AI can try a lot of things
I love the mid-analogy check-in. You say, it's going well, I'm going to continue.
You can do a lot of things really shallowly. It's like ideation, prototyping, but that's something the human mind is not very good at. We are better at going deep and being experts, and not as well at being able to come up with 100 different ideas.
Well, maybe you should hang out the law school, because that's what we specialize in, or journalism even more. But yeah, no, I mean, the microwave metaphor, and I know people should get on this, is the idea that it's not the microwave ended up being like useless. It just didn't end up being very good for civic things like steaming vegetables. And, you know, I think we're sort of finding that, and I think, you know, the interesting question is what exactly, especially LLMs, good at, but you're finding different things than me.
So I completely agree with summarizing being the best thing that AI has done so far, and the microwave analogy. And I think AI could create some microwaves in areas where we have nothing. And I think about measurement in particular. When I think about organizations, there's a lot of stuff that we know is super important, like corporate culture. We know that it's so important for the performance of organizations and for the happiness of employees. And we also cannot measure it as is. Surveys are not great. It's just very, very difficult. And I think AI could create a microwave here. It could create something that it's not going to give us great measures of corporate culture, but some very comparable measures across organizations. So at Columbia Business, we have a couple of projects in this area where we're using Glassdoor data. Now, Glassdoor is the ratio of noise to signal is extremely high. It's people talking about their own companies. There is content, but this is where AI has been a game changer. I've tried using Glassdoor for many years, and finally with AI, I'm starting to get stuff that's meaningful about the company. And I think again, it's not gonna give you beautiful insights around the company, but it's gonna show you it's gonna kind of warm up the milk in a sense to continue and I think it could be very useful because once we get those let's call them soft measures in, and we can sort of have them in an objective, replicable way, then we can initiate conversations, and we can I think companies could be better places if this stuff is measured, if the CEO is kept accountable on this stuff, if the CEO can improve that in real time. And so what we're trying to do is to bring in machine learning, AI, and LLM on Glassdoor to have real-time evolution of how the people who work in a company perceive the company, so that is something that can then be used to make decisions.
So I'm going to talk about sort of riffing on that as like another limitation is sort of what's called Goodhart's law, which is like when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to become a measure. And I think we're going to see this like on steroids in the age of ML, where you're like, we're measuring stuff, we're predicting, we're training, we're hitting these benchmarks, and we see the scaling laws keep going, but we're overfitting in many ways on these benchmarks, and then we're going to keep thinking that we have the right answer, but we're never probing out far enough out so that we're getting kind of like in psychology, the idea would be like concept validity, that actually the labels that you have for the thing that you have are really the right thing. And what's interesting is also like, as someone who does stuff on as I know Lydia does also, like on online labor markets, or did at one point, on online labor markets, where it's like it's been an enormous source of training data for both like fine tuning and you're like paying someone to like ask questions of an LLM. But now I sort of go onto like an online thing and all the respondents are using LLMs. And so now this problem has become this like cat and mouse where it's like you can't actually get somebody to give you honestly what's on their mind. They'll just like ask GPT and paste in the answer into into a survey box. And so it's like and then you just have bots that are automatically filling out surveys. So actually trying to find out the truth in some like ground truth way is going to become a harder and harder problem. And I think we're going to run into the limitations of that.
It's like you have a mirror in front of you and a mirror behind you, and you look into the mirror, you basically see infinity.
Yeah.
So, early on, I started hearing this statement, about when people were concerned about the impact of AI on labor and the workplace, and what people would say is that AI won't take your job. A person who knows how to use AI will take your job. And I'm wondering, is that really true, or is that kind of self-serving bullshit? I mean, what do you think about this? Okay, so self-serving bullshit, there it goes.
Yeah. Who's it self-serving? I don't disagree with the bullshit part. I just don't know served by the theory. I think that I gotta look to history, and I think there's different ways things have gone. There have been times where there have been technologies that have been truly augmentative, and where people's jobs were not taken away, but often made improved. Now, I think the general purpose computer, the PC over the 80s, was maybe the best example. I mean, if you were a journalist or a writer, as opposed to using a typewriter, you were now using a computer, so you could do your job kind of better. And that to me would be like ideal if AI empowers a lot of workers and smaller enterprises to be able to do things better. That would be it. But that's not all of it. I mean, the Industrial Revolution, it's hard to generalize about 100 years of period. But, I think there were genuinely, for example, people who made textiles by hand who were replaced with people who knew how to operate factories that made textiles. And so and I think that's partially because of it's partially the technology, but partially distribution of power.
I think it depends on the field. So I can talk about computer science in particular. It's poetic justice that the thing that AI is best at is writing code. So it's coming for us. And the field is split about whether this is amazing, because we all hate writing for loops, or like tragic, because the art is dying. I'm in the I don't want to write for loops category, in case anyone was wondering. But if you look at, again, the history of computer science, 400 years ago, computer meant a person who was doing math by hand. And over time, we kind of went up. We called it stack of abstraction. And then it was punch cards, and some part of it was mechanical. And then you could write it on a keyboard. And then we had the internet, and we had the cloud. And every time, languages used to have to manage the actual computer's memory. I'm like, I better deallocate this cell so something else can fit in there. And now we don't have to worry about that. So we've been able to go higher and higher until people can get closer to, with hopefully some of the AI, just express their intent. And then that would be the goal, and we're getting closer to that. It's not nearly there now, but I still think we are in the infancy of AI. There's so many things. Even last week, Sonnet 3.7 came out, orders of magnitude better at coding tasks. So we're seeing these improvements every week, which is just unprecedented, I think, for a technology, for it to keep going like this. But so in computer science, so there's, I really think, a long horizon of code that still needs to be written. There's so many systems that are just dreadful. And if we could write better code faster, we would write a whole lot more of it. So I don't see that as ending. But now, that said, the original job of being a computer, that did end, people doing math by hand. So some of those people, I don't know if they aged out. It depends on how fast the technology came through. But some fields do get better when you enable things to go faster in them, because we consume more of it.
Can I answer a question? Do you mind if I?
Sure.
You know, I'm interested in the code situation, because I feel like in the writing world, one of the problems and the reason people are talking about microwaves and process is, you know, the stuff that AI generates is kind of junky. You know what I mean? Like articles, you know, sort of articles about, people are like, oh, this is some, you know, AI generated article about the pros and cons of like democracy or something. You know, and it's like, okay, it's great, this is gonna be real insightful. In summary, democracy is usually good, but sometimes, you know, like it gives you this kind of very rote. And I wonder, you know, you're saying that there's a problem with a lot of bad code in the world, or I guess the problem, is there sort of, the people who are coders feel that AI is leading to kind of a proliferation of bad code, or is the code considered high quality code?
The code is better than most coders would write. Because it's just so painful to do by hand.
And why do you think it's so different? Because I mean, I also was a computer programmer earlier in my life, and it seemed that there were these, you know, sort of amazing programmers, very talented, would write very elegant code, and you know, it is a form of human expression. Is there some reason it's different, or is it just AI is better?
I would say a majority of code is fairly functional and not an art piece. I have seen some code that's like really surprising how efficient or compact or something it is, but a lot of code just needs to be reusable and easy for other people to write and understand, so it's fairly boilerplate. And a lot of it is even copied and pasted and then adjusted from other places, because so much of it is reused, at least in some level. Whereas writing, I think, is quite different. Unless you're writing an essay about something that's already on Wikipedia, it's very hard to have a template that's easy to reuse.
Right.
So I think it is a little bit different. I almost think of coding sometimes as just like laying bricks. Maybe there's an artistic side of that, but a lot of it is just putting bricks down. And the faster, the more roads and better roads we can have.
Can I chime in on that? I think it's partly because like the audiences are different. The audience for writing is other people. The audience for code is mostly a compiler and then the other engineers that are going to see this thing going on. And because there's that discipline of a compiler and the other engineers, and it has to work, it's just going to, you know, I think we can generate synthetic data, for example, in code form, you know, much easier than we could generate synthetic writing, which is then I think is interesting about the whole employment question. As I always come back to this chess example. It's like we know now machines can just beat any human at chess, and yet we still watch chess games. I mean, some people do.
Do we?
Now, I never did, but people I know that are into chess still think it's interesting to talk about Magnus Carlsen.
Yeah.
And so that it becomes like it's, you know, the person is like, I think what the AI makes naked about the labor market is that it's about your status and your relative relationships to other people and the amount of attention you can command and who's paying attention to you. And so I think like now that part of what is a job is going to become more important. So a writer is now going to be as important, like who you are, what association you're with, as well as what you're writing. And so good writing on its own will be harder and harder to divorce from the identity and social position of the writer. And that's good and very bad, because it's going to be just on the strength of your writing. I think it's going to be harder to differentiate yourself.
I don't have that dark a view, you know. I mean, for the reasons you said, which is we're not compilers. I mean, I don't know. How do you feel about like something cooked by a human chef versus like, you know,
a microwave?
You know, like
food.
I don't know, microwave or robot generated kind of food. You know, like isn't it because we're still the audience for writing that maybe this is overly optimistic, but that like if a novelist has a truly great book, that it'll actually stand out more from the direct that's all out there, where you're reading all this. I
think that's true for like real art. I think that's probably true. Like the returns to being really great are going to go even higher because now boilerplate is cheap.
Right.
And so the returns to being really great go way up. But then for like the vast bulk of writing that is just work a day, It's done. And I think of like internal memos as like the first thing that went with LLMs. It's just like the most boilerplate, terrible form of writing, and it belongs in the graveyard. I'm glad we got rid of bureaucratic.
Of course, sometimes you want your AI to read the memo for you.
Yeah.
And tell you what. Sorry.
If we can switch from the microwave analogy to a fashion one, then we can talk about there are reasons that you buy a suit off the rack, and there's a reason that someone buys a custom suit. And a custom suit is held in a particular kind of esteem or regard precisely because it's made in a non-automated kind of fashion.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, one thing we see when we look at history and past technological revolutions is that many industries kind of remain the same. These are consumer-facing industries. Like, think about restaurants. There have been so many revolutions in the food storage, food production, yet a restaurant now is very similar to a restaurant 100 years ago. And I don't know why we stay in gastronomical sort of metaphors, but it's...
We're all hungry.
and so I think it would be useful to look at history, and there's a demand component here. As soon as something becomes very easy to replicate, it becomes very cheap. And so I think what we've learned from these revolutions is that resources will move to stuff that's difficult to replicate. And we've seen it. And when we look back, and I think the most interesting work in this area is done by looking at what happened in the IT revolution and who gained and who lost in that. And I think we get a very nuanced picture of that. There's a work by David Autor at MIT, and he just looks occupation by occupation, task by task, what happened. And you really have to look at the details. So I think part of, again, I come back to what our duties are in terms of researchers, and I think part of that is to be much more granular in trying to predict the effects of AI by looking at very individual tasks and how they're affected.
Are there ways, ethically speaking, that you do not want to see AI used in labor or in organizations?
I think that to me the first and most important thing is transparency and understanding what it is that it does. I think that organizations should not use AI unless they fully understand how it works and what it does and why it gives the answers it does. AI is used in areas like healthcare. I want to make sure that a doctor fully understands how the AI is giving the answer it's giving. And I think that applies across the board. And there are many other ethical considerations, but I think that's the first one.
So I think the ethical thing is gone. Actually, we're past this point. Like, just think of one of the big engines of AI is just military. And so, literally it's going to be about figuring out who and how to kill. And we're going to see a lot of development in that space. That's where like a lot of money is going. And I think, if we're kind of, and there's all kinds of geopolitical reasons for that, but it's going to be, and when you think of where's the incentives, again, it's like companies that make money by monetizing ad revenue, finance, predicting stock prices, and then weapons. And this is where the big sources of money are. And I think there's going to be a lot of healthcare, and there's going to be a lot of great science, I think, that comes out of using AI, and just really does accelerate a lot of parts of science. But when I think of the big structures that are really kind of putting a lot of the money down to make this, to drive this technology forward, I don't know that ethics is a big part of what there's front of mind.
I mean, I think there's some real, in fact, it would be better if we got ahead of some of these. I think there are all kinds of highly unethical uses for artificial intelligence. Military uses would have been one that I've jumped to, and I think should be worried that you blow through that quickly and end up with unmanned artificially intelligent killing. Isaac Asimov, back in the 50s, when he first designed the first 3 rules of robotics, his first one was like, robots shouldn't kill people, and we seem to sort of blown past that thing already. The other one I'd sort of circle on, I mean, not fully. I've been reading about like the Ukraine-Russia war, and it's mostly conducted by, there's a huge amount of drone work, which I think is still human-directed, but it's not hard to make the jump, although it would have to be better. I think a slightly underappreciated unethical use of AI is human impersonation, which has such obvious economic advantages. Thinking you're talking to a human. It's usually one or another version of fraud, but we're kind of sort of sliding into using AIs into all kinds of areas. Sometimes deliberately fraud, like trying to get people to cough over a password or something like that, but sometimes just sort of softly replacing place. So that's an area, human impersonation, I think we should be much more active about.
I guess I think that the ideal would be that the human who told the AI could do that would be held accountable for it. Somehow in the online world, that notion doesn't always hold because we don't always know who people are, but that is sort of a choice that we've somewhat made around the internet, and that's been rolled back a little bit. And when Facebook had people put their real names on it, that had many effects in this area. I can't say it solved the problem, but it's still mostly people doing this. As long as I agree that if it's just, AI doesn't just do things by itself. And as long as, for example, one of the earliest, not AI, but there is all this automatic stock trading. Right? And so at the end of the day, I was at Night Capital, someone just they had a bug, the whole thing went bust. They're accountable for it. So as long as we align the incentives, it can still work. But it's when people are the AI did it, I told it to do X, but it did Y, that's not okay. If you told it to do something, you better make sure that it was able to do that, and you have to live with the responsibility of it. So I think that would be a very good start. So I agree, if you choose to impersonate someone, then you go to jail.
Well, right now it's not illegal unless you're using frauds. I think we should get ahead of that one a little. There's this movie Blade Runner, which I recommend, which had a law preventing, that made robots had to proactively identify themselves. Anyway, this is one of my various legal campaigns to try to pass a Blade Runner law.
So we have a few minutes for questions from the audience.
Thank you for the great talk. My question is very general. So there's this adage, a really old traditional adage that only iron can cut iron. So similarly, you can say only powerful weapons can counter powerful weapons. So what are your thoughts on how AI itself can be used to prevent the destructive or unethical aspects of AI that can be brought about by humans?
Anyone?
Well, one thought from the previous session that I heard is one of the problems with AI is that using all the GPUs, burning up the atmosphere, but it could potentially ameliorate that by finding designs that use less carbon in other areas. So we are, actually, DeepSeek is a lot more efficient than traditional AI, so it will itself become, it can efficientize, not a word, itself. But it can also, even if it couldn't do that, it could potentially do that in other fields. So sort of like a cap and trade, or if it can't reduce its own emissions, it could reduce them somewhere else that's easier. That's something that's possible. I don't know if that's what's going to happen, but it could.
An obvious application to the problem I just described, which is human impersonation, is obviously better detection of who's human or not, and having your own, sort of artificially intelligent ability to detect things. I imagine, similarly, it's funny, we talked about AIs being good at summarizing, but also producing too much junky information. And in a way, those are at war with each other, because summaries, in theory, is like weeding out the unnecessary information.
Well, remember, I hate summaries. So.
Yeah, so you're in, yes.
I'm consistent.
I think there may be something different about engineering and law. We live and breathe summaries, but also we read 1,000-page opinions that so you sometimes run into limits. So, in any ways, I just think the future will be about information gluts and then information reduction techniques at war with each other all the time.
Yeah, I just really agree with that. I think in one sense, like the real promise is that this world of bewildering complexity that we just cannot, we live in a civilization that has enormous amounts of things that we just do not understand and cannot understand, that like AI is actually going to be really helpful for making that world like more legible and understandable. And like, I think summarization is a part of this. I hate reading law documents, so I love the summarization for like understanding legalese, and have a project on sort of like showing normal people when you use an AI summary of a judicial opinion, they like understand it and think the court, think differently about the court as a result. So I think like the idea that if you imagine that like one of the big challenges facing democracies is that citizens don't have enough time and attention to like grasp the complexities of all the issues we face. Hopefully, in a good world, we would have some incentives to develop AI that would actually improve that capacity to make sense of our social world and argue about it. I'm not optimistic, but I I think I've been the negative person on this on this panel. But I would really love to see more AI that was like sort of tailored to making like a deliberative democracy work better, and that would be great.
On this side.
Okay, this is Cindy Yanhualiu. I'm a Columbia Engineering School alumni leader, and I just want to thank you all to organize this great AI summit event. I just want to, it's not really a big question, but I just want to relay what Professor, I think this great lady who used to work at Knight Capital, I kind of agree with her opinion about like will AI, replacing the whole human labor. I would think AI just like another innovation or another, almost even using the microwave. I think it's really the one who embraces this innovation will prevail. And because I asked this question to 3 chat box. One is ChatGPT, one DeepSeek, and another one is XAI's Grok. So I think the AI itself, the answer is the AI wouldn't replace the human labor in the future, but it will change the labor market. So some repetitive or maybe even dangerous will disappear, but then it will increase. There are new jobs will emerge. I think just using the example using the military, I think the AI in the future, if the human beings still want to kill each other or whatever, so then they maybe send drones and instead of send human beings or even robots. I think that's still better than killing human beings, right? So I think that's the positive side of it. So I guess my opinion is just we human beings still have an interactive way to direct this innovation the way we want it to direct. I guess if you, even using the microwave, so the one who use microwave a lot, I guess it will utilize, because I definitely use microwave more than the stove, but the stove still exists. So I think just be positive and embracing it. Yeah, and also I went to the AI, the engineering to AI demo. There's some great innovation. I think that's really very proud of Columbia. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. If I comment on that comment, I feel that there is a, sort of the most positive version of this is use of AI like in an empowering way, a little bit like I said about the plow or the personal computer, that people sort of still have their jobs, but the menial or tedious tasks are sort of taken away and, leaving for humans the either maybe to take more time off, which somehow never happens. Despite multiple technological productivity revolutions, you might think we'd have more time off. That rarely happens. But just in general, to do the stuff that's the good stuff.
It's like building an extra highway lane.
Yeah, but you're right. But I think it's all about the distribution of power. I think the people on this panel have a lot of autonomy in our own work, and we can decide what we're going to do. And we use AI probably to make our lives more productive. What I would be concerned about is a different kind of situation where, imagine maybe you're a coder or maybe you're a lawyer, like a paralegal, And it makes it easier to do whatever the task is. Let's say writing complaints for a lawyer or whatever. And so then when you were previously asked to do, let's say, 2 a month, now you're asked to do 100 a month using AIs. And so you end up in this, all that happens, is a little bit like you're saying, is what you're expected to do is more. And not only that, you're sort of everyone sort of becomes a middle manager, where your job is supervising all these little AI functions and making them work. I think there's and then that depends on, ultimately how much power is in labor versus other, where it's something we control, use for ourselves, or whether it becomes this sort of cost-cutting, mechanism that forces everybody to like triple their production, and our lives get worse. So I don't know which it is.
So, I think one thing we've learned from not just the evidence on technological change in IT, but also the evidence on adjustment to trade, is that the time scale matters. It matters if it happens fast, and it matters if it happens slow. We're still humans with a lifespan, and for whom it's going to be harder to change when and we're older than we were in the past. And I think actually that demographic difference is important, because when you have fewer young people coming online every time, the impacts of technological change are faced by us old people, and we're just less elastic than sort of when you have technological change happening during periods of much faster demographic growth. And that also means, but by the way, Tim, it's actually interesting that we do actually have a long-term increase in leisure time. We just take it at the end of life.
That's true.
Yeah, and so seriously, where lifespan's extended, we still retire around the same ages. So when you actually count the amount of time spent not in the labor market, it's vastly increased. We're actually about halfway to where Keynes thought we would be.
Yes, we never got his, what did he say, 30-hour work week?
We
never
but we
got
get
that.
it all in retirement.
I sometimes have that in the summer, but that's a different.
So this will have to be our last question. If you can ask it succinctly and we can get a succinct answer, we can still sneak it in under the wire.
I mean, it's a straight build on, right? One of the opinions we're hearing is the way AI sort of will replicate the economic power structure that already exists. So I guess, obviously, capital has a reason to push it for those of us who are human beings and not capital, right? What are sort of the counter forces that you can see that would kind of balance that out, that can happen? So I'm hearing labor organization, I'm hearing slowing down the time horizon. I would bring up, there's a lot of movement in sort of social organizing that is very analog, right? That's like, okay, get off the computer, go talk to your neighbors, the sort of mutual aid framework. I'm just kind of curious what other sort of ways of counterforcing comes to mind for you guys.
I think one topic we haven't touched, and it's very important, is who controls the information here. That's because I think AI could potentially do a lot in terms of information, and particularly political information. There's this good scenario where we control what AI does for us, and we can search, we can get the summaries we want. And there is also this very negative scenario where someone else uses AI to micro-target us. With fake news or real news 10 days before an election, and that could be really, really powerful. So I think there's a big question here about how we put in place ways to control who controls that flow of information.
So on that note, we will have to conclude. We'd like to say thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our hosts. And thank you all for participating in this conversation as well.